Thank you. You are all too young to have remembered the black and white TV show, This Is Your Life. And I'm just showing you the silly slide by way of saying that this is a little bit of a different format. Bill has asked me to do a fair amount of the talking. That's a privilege. So it's an interview format. We're unrehearsed, so but I think we'll finish easily within the hour. I have a couple postscripts at the end that are kind of ironic, possibly spiritual tie-ins to Bill's career, and so forgive us if we go just a few minutes over, but I think we'll be within the hour. There is another reason why I get to do some of the talking today. I've become reacquainted with Bill this year at the museum, and in the course of that, a couple months later, I discovered that he is a modest and a humble man, which I think is the mark of a true high achiever. So I get to do some talking for you, and you'll probably see that.
My pleasure. It makes it a lot easier for me.
Okay.
And I do have kind of a shortness of breath problem, 2 lung surgeries, and a month in the hospital. So I just hope I can get through this.
William Bacon made an impact on thousands of Colorado aviators, and a commensurate impact on the aviation community and the aircraft industry in Colorado and far beyond. I also, in the course of getting to know him better, discovered a few months in that he'd made a rather large impact on my own life many years ago. So it's a privilege to be doing this today. So we dive right in?
Dive right in.
Okay. This is kind of slow. So I believe this is the first page of your logbook.
Yes.
And it's 1951.
Yes, that's correct. It's 1951. I was 14 years old, and I started taking flying lessons at this airport called Inglewood. It was in the vicinity which is now all roughly Hampton and I-25. And when we were young kids, even before I was 14, the neighborhood kids on their bikes would ride out to this Inglewood Airport. Boy, it was like discovering Disneyland. And we were out there quite a bit, mooching airplane rides, and I was impressed with just how nice the people were to us there. It was none of this, hey, damn kids, get your clammy little hands off the air. None of that. It was the owner of the airport's wife, Mrs. Anderson, actually told us that if we went home and got a note from our parents, that she would see to it that we got a plane ride. And so that was great. But anyway, age 14, I was flying one of these Luscombe 8Fs. And this thing's kind of a tricky handful. It's a tail dragger airplane, and it's rather unforgiving on the landings, and it's kind of hard to wheel land too. So my instructors were beginning to wonder if I could ever pass the private pilot flight test, and so ultimately they switched me over to the J3 Cub. Now, there was no FAA at that time. It was the CAA, the Civil Aeronautics Administration, and or Civil Aeronautics Authority. And so one day I was at the airport, and they said, "Hey kid, have you taken your CAA private pilot written test yet?" And I said, "No." They said, "Well, go over to Stapleton, where their CAA office was, and they'll give you the test." So I go over there, and it's a bunch of true-false questions, and so they graded the test right there, and they wrote the score right on your student certificate. a lot different than it is now. And I got 100.
Whoa.
I thought, wow, this is my kind of test. You're an old smoothie. And then later on, I found out about everybody got 100. So,
Now, I'm the son of an airplane marketing guy who he wanted to show that Cessnas are so easy to fly, even a young boy could do it. But you still had to be 15 years, 8 months to get a student pilot license and 16 to solo. How is it that you log flight time at age 14?
oh, you can log, like you can log flight time at age 6, but there's, you can't, like you say, you can't solo until you're 16. So in fact, they told me to back it down. You can see I got quite a bit just in a few months here, and they said, well, you can't solo, so kind of take it easy till you get closer to age 16. But I did get my private, my CAA private, while I was still a senior in high school, and I got a ham radio license when I was a senior in high school through the radio club. I got, but one thing I found that being a senior in high school, it was kind of neat to take girls for plane rides. Not many people could do that.
Like most of you, I've raised teenagers, and it's you get pretty scared letting them out with the family car at 16.
Called my house and said, I don't want my daughter going out in your unscheduled flight.
Uh-oh.
She said, not for an unscheduled flight.
Okay, 1954, you enlist in the Navy. I wanted to ask you why then and why the Navy?
Well, yeah, that was the thing. When I turned 18 years old, right before that, just graduated from high school, this big black cloud was over our head. The draft, we had conscription, and so I didn't necessarily want to get drafted into the infantry. I would have gone, but they said, a lot of my high school classmates said, hey, why don't you go out and join the Naval Reserves at Buckley? There's a Naval Air Station right over on the east side of town, Buckley Field. A lot of people don't know Buckley used to be a Naval Air Station in World War II. But anyway, there was a lot of Navy activity over there, and they did have a reserve program. They called us Weekend Warriors, and their program was you would come to Buckley one weekend every month, and then 2 weeks on active duty summer training, and this would keep you from getting drafted, I thought. It turns out I served 8 years as a reservist, but one of those years my squadron did get activated, so I went in 1 year of active duty, and there's a...
No, sorry, on the left is a TBM, is that correct?
Yeah, I'm just going to get to that.
Somewhat famous because George H.W. Bush
right.
flew those.
This is the aircraft that's associated with George H.W. Bush when he got shot down and rescued by the submarine during World War II.
Did you take this picture?
No. A photographer in the squadron took the picture, and these are the kind of airplanes they had at Buckley. I was put in this squadron called VS-711. It was an anti-submarine squadron, and there's no doubt that these were from Buckley because of the Denver markings on.
You talked about you flew in the bilge.
Yeah, right.
In that rear gunner position.
Yeah, a lot of people don't. This variant has radar. It's got a radar pod here, and it's closed in up there. But another cruise station is right in this area here, and we did call that the bilge. I didn't like to ride in the bilge very much because you couldn't see when you were kind of all It had a window about this big, and that was it. But it was great fun. This variant here, this area is all open cockpit. You can really see out of one of these. Here I was, a 19-year-old kid, and thrown in with these TBMs. I remember the very first time I got in a TBM. We took off at Buckley. We landed at Long Beach, California, at the Naval Air Station, Los Alamitos, for our 2-week summer training activities. So,
Well, I was wondering, these are submarine hunters.
yeah, right.
How
they
many
made
did you
submarines.
find in
Jeez.
Colorado?
Yeah, right. And that lasted about 2 years, and then the Navy decided that these things were obsolete. When the airplanes weren't very old, 10 years old, but they sent them to the boneyard. And
Then you go to P2s.
that's right. And then they had, we got the P2V Neptune, which is a long-range Navy patrol aircraft and an anti-submarine airplane. It was a sub-chaser. And this aircraft weighed 80,000 pounds. It carried an 11-man crew. There were 7 enlisted men and four officers. This thing here is the antenna for the powerful APS 20 search radar. It's powered by 2 R3350 piston engines, and then it's got 2 auxiliary J34 jet engines. The jet engines were on there just as an auxiliary to aid in the takeoff. These things ordinarily, without the jets, wouldn't fly very well on one engine. If you lost an engine on takeoff, it was kind of scary. So the jets made a whole new airplane out of it. But here I am as an enlisted air crewman on the P2Vs. I ultimately did get the gold enlisted air crew wings. You had to qualify for 3 positions on the aircraft. And I was radar, radio, and ECM.
So I like this story.
Oh yeah, I was at Buckley till Buckley ceased to become a naval air station, and then I spent some time with a reserve squadron in Olathe, Kansas, and then our new president, JFK, activated a squadron. They sent us all to Cuba for a year. Yeah, actually we were divided. They sent the squadron to Patuxent River, Maryland, part of it, and then half of it was down in Cuba. So this is during the Cuban Missile Crisis. This is a stock picture here, where this P2V is doing intelligence gathering on the Russian shipping. So this P2V with the LG on the marking on the tail, that's VP-18 out of Jacksonville, and he's doing what all the patrol planes would do when you find a Russian. The ship was called the Okotko, O-K-H-O-T-K-O, and they had a standard procedure. There were 2 big cameras in the aircraft. One is, we've got one on display upstairs in our World War II airplane called the K-20. It's got a big spade grip here, and then it's got a cocking handle. You hold it up and you can advance the film through the camera. And so we had the bow observer has a camera, and the after station has a camera. And you fly down almost beside the ship, and you take a kind of a hull profile of, you get as many pictures as you can of this would be the starboard side. Then the aircraft goes out, the pilot makes a 270-degree turn, comes back around, and then he photographs the bow. Then you go out, another 270-degree turn around, and you come back on the port side, and then you go over here, make a 270, you come back and get the stern, and then you fly directly over the top, and you get an overhead shot. So, Fred found this picture of this thing right here. Well,
You forgot to reel in the trailing antenna.
yeah, that's right. The for HF communications, they have a trailing wire antenna. It's about, maybe about 400 feet in length. And I had this metal object here. It's called the egg, and it's a little bigger than a chicken egg, more like that coffee cup. But anyway, that was out trailing behind the aircraft, and we were down low photographing it, and I didn't reel in the antenna in time, and that metal egg hit that steel Russian ship going about 200 knots. It must have sounded like a bomb going off. I mean, it went bam! I mean, just ripped it right off the aircraft. And anyway, it was kind of an incident. All the Russians got excited and took our picture, and oh my goodness.
History background, in the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Russians were shipping missiles and warheads into Cuba. They were pretending they weren't, but we set up a naval blockade, and it brought the world to near disaster.
It's a correction, Fred. We had a quarantine, not a blockade.
Okay.
Blockade is an act of war. So it was called the politically correct quarantine.
Okay, thank you. You shouldn't be bringing your missiles to Cuba. I invited the Mile High Wing of the Commemorative Air Force today, but they're having their monthly meeting, and they have this Navy SNB based right up here at Rocky Mountain Airport. You can take rides in it, but it's, you tell some interesting stories about, you use this as your corporate airplane.
In the 60s, these SMBs were everywhere on naval air stations. About every base had 2, 3, 4 of these at least. And one assignment I frequently got at Buckley was they would put 2 enlisted men in the back of this aircraft and observe for traffic when they were doing instrument proficiency, where the pilots would be in the front with an instrument hood on, and we would look for traffic and call out traffic. Then there's a few times when we were in Cuba, we'd go on Liberty to these nearby Caribbean islands. One time we wanted to go to San Juan, Puerto Rico, and they told us, well, there's no security to leave your P2V or any hangar space or ramp space, so you'll have to land the P2V on Vieques Island, which is a little nearby island. They had 3 of these Beach Model 18, the SNBs, and they flew our whole 11-man crew over to San Juan so we could go on Liberty. So I got a fair amount of hours flying in these things back when they were real common, and now you don't see many of them.
The one at Rocky Mountain's a 1943 version. You can go, and they'll give you a ride in it for a small fee. Then, okay, out of the Navy, you come back and you begin your civil flying career in earnest. And I think this should interest some people. You flew out of Ruston Airport. It was named something else, but that's at 104th and Federal. A lot of people don't know there was an airport there. But the hangar survived. It was a nightclub for a while, a bar, and then it became an auto parts store. But you had a J3 partnership with some crooked cops.
Right. Yeah, this airport was at 104th and Federal, and it was called the Ruston Airport. It was operated by a gentleman named Harry Ruston, and or they also called it the Federal Heights Airport. But yeah, 10 of us went together and bought a J3 for $1,000. So we each shelled out $100, and it turned out that most of our club members in this J3 Cub Club was they were Denver policemen. And I don't know if any of you were living in Denver at about 1960, but they had a police scandal. And these police burglars or these criminals were, well, they would go in and knock off a safe in a building someplace, and then they'd go back and a few hours later and investigate their own crime. This went on for a long time. And one of the police burglars had a safe in the back of his cop car, and it fell out. And I think that's probably what did it. But anyway, most of our Cub members went to Canyon City, so that kind of did away with our club. Yeah, it was interesting. This restaurant here was called the Flight Deck, and they found, when they excavated this, they found a tunnel between the two buildings, and there was rumors that the bootleggers had used that tunnel for moonshine whiskey. But yeah, that was an interesting airport. One of the celebrities that was there nearly every day. Any of you remember Weatherman Bowman on Channel 2? That Weatherman Bowman had a Ryan ST, which is a kind of a tandem airplane. It was a pre-World War II training aircraft with a low wing and a radial engine. And so Ed Bowman had one of these things. I suspect it's probably in this picture someplace. But anyway, so we used to see Weatherman Bowman out there quite a bit. I was always going to ask him for a ride in his Ryan ST, but never got to it. But,
I always wondered, on the J3 Cub was available in any color you wanted as long as it was bright yellow.
Yeah, right. That's the only color you see them in.
So you flew through ratings here. You just gained hours.
Right, yeah. I got started building hours for commercial, and then I joined the Civil Air Patrol. You say, well, what's that? Well, Civil Air Patrol is a civilian auxiliary to the United States Air Force. And it has two main programs, two important programs. One is their cadet program, where they take these young kids, high school kids mostly, give them a uniform, teach them to march, teach them a little bit about military operations. And anyway, some of these kids really eat this up. So what do? They run out and join the Air Force. And so it's a very successful recruiting tool for the U.S. Air Force. And the other program is their search and rescue program. Now, I never got involved very much with the cadet end of it, but I used to take a few of them on orientation flights. But I did a lot of searching. And so a downed aircraft was, I mean, in Colorado with these mountains west of us, I mean, it's treacherous. in the wintertime with bad weather. And so,
this is one of your finds.
right, yeah, a gentleman rented this airplane right here, the Cessna 182, from an FBO in Longmont, and he said he needed to, it was on New Year's Day or New Year's Eve, and he said he needed to go to Grand Junction, and he'd be back the same day. Well, he made it over to Grand Junction, did his business, but he never came back. And so the aircraft's missing. Well, this was the days before ELTs, and so it was missing for about 6 months. That following summer, a couple of fishermen were fishing in the mountains west of Boulder, and they picked up some aircraft wreckage. And it was just some pieces of aluminum. And they took it into the local sheriff's office and dumped it on the desk. Hey, here's this thing. It's aircraft wreckage. Sheriff says, well, it's probably from higher up the mountain because the wind blows 100 knots in the wintertime. So they said, look in the top, look for this wreck at the top of the mountain, just beneath where they found the wreckage. And so I was there the day they got the call. So I flew a Cessna 337 right over the area they described. We could see the wreck. I found it in like 15 minutes. And so then I wanted to accompany the ground crew when they went in. So this is what we found. And here we're bringing the body back out. There was one person on this airplane. You could see it was survivable. He got out, and the seat belts were dangling. Both radios were on the emergency frequency, 121.5. But anyway, he either starved to death or probably froze to death.
This is the day before emergency locator transmitter. And at the end, I want to circle back to that issue because we have something interesting to say about that. But all you had was flyover and visual search, which often is not easy in the mountains of Colorado.
No, it's not.
He took off, and there's a lot of pilots say this is Corona Pass, in the mountains you'll often find rocks inside the clouds, and that's what happened here.
Yeah.
And had he had an ELT on board, he probably would have been located the next day and picked up by a helicopter.
That's right. He could have lived.
So tragic that he probably froze to death. Is that you in the white trousers?
No, this gentleman here flies for Continental. His name was Bob Gaines.
Okay. So you received an award from Governor Love.
Right. I was, the CAP unit I was in was called Denver Group 1. And the city gave us a building over on Stapleton. And the commanding officer of Denver Group 1 was a popular Jewish lawyer who had an office on 17th Avenue. He knew the governor, he knew Senator Dong, he knew everybody. And, but he set it up with the governor to make these awards. There was about 10 of us there that day. Yeah.
This picture interests me because my dad's with Cessna. We took some fun vacations in this airplane. You amassed 1,000 hours in the Skymaster,
Right.
and you were flying AWOL service people.
That's correct. The FBO over at Longmont, Cliff Judson, got a contract with the U.S. Army, and they used to, if a soldier would run off and go AWOL from the Army, and maybe later on he would get picked up by the local sheriff, brought to the jail, then the MP office in Denver used to get in a van and drive up and retrieve these prisoners. Well, they had them all over the place, in Wyoming and New Mexico and Nebraska, Kansas. Well, they couldn't even handle it in the van anymore. So they decided to try aircraft, and so we were flying every day, take an MP, go get one of these kids. Usually a typical AWOL soldier was like 18, 19 years old, and he would probably turn himself in because he'd run out of money or he'd get hungry or whatever. But we'd go get him. Sometimes it was the same guy. These Indians from Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota, we were always going up there getting prisoners. But yeah, I got a lot of hours to.
This aircraft was sold to the Air Force and used in Vietnam as a forward air control. It's called the O2, as Jim would know. Jim was a Huey pilot. Going to announce that. But I'm envious of your 1,000 hours in the Skymaster.
Yeah.
You operated your own aircraft sales company right up here at Jeffco Airport.
Yeah, in 1971, 72, 73, and 74, I started an aircraft sales business. Bought and sold airplanes. The very first FBO at Jeffco over here was called Air Corporation. And this hangar was called B8, Bravo 8. And when I rented the building, Air was no longer there. It was aircraft though. But this window right here was the window of my office. It was on the second floor. You go up a flight of stairs. I was right at the top of the stair. And
Can you hear in the back?
Very well.
Okay. Can you turn him up? Or need to speak up so those
yeah,
guys.
right, okay.
Okay. So we'll talk about Reba in a little bit. You knew Reba here. And there's the old Jeffco Tower. Some of you may remember. Out there. So you were brokering used aircraft?
Mostly, yeah.
Okay. Then, this is neat, you had a contract to deliver twin-engine Cessnas across the North Atlantic to Innsbruck, Austria.
Yeah, I made contact with these two enterprising brothers who lived in Innsbruck, Austria. Their name was Wolfgang and Hannes Anderlein. And they sold airplanes in Germany and Italy, and Switzerland. So they asked me if I'd be interested in ferrying them across the Atlantic for them. So I did that for a while. That's my wife, Judy, and we were, that picture was taken in Zurich, Switzerland. So most of the light planes I took across were real, the Cessna 340 was real popular in Germany for some reason. It was efficient. It didn't use as much fuel as some of the bigger cabin class airplanes. And so anyway, I did a lot of Atlantic crossing.
You, and it interests me, these are, well, I'll show you routes that my father flew in B-17s, but these are some of your routes from Denver.
Just did that just to show some of the routes you can take.
Why would you divert all the way up to, is that Baffin Island?
Yeah, that's
why would you go that far?
Frobisher Bay. I drew that on there because a lot of people fly single-engine airplanes across. and they're a little bit squeamish. They want as much land under them as they can get. This trip takes, in a 200-knot airplane, about 3 days to get to Europe. And so by going this way, it's a few hundred miles further, but you're over land a lot more. And then some of your legs are shorter too.
Okay. So, as I said, interesting to me because my dad flew B-17s on this route. And shameless self-promotion, I get to do the B-17 talk at Cooper's Troopers in December.
Yeah.
And at the National Museum in November. So, yeah, done some study of that route. And here you are, an arrival in Innsbruck.
Yeah. That's right. I think.
And your notes say that this made the flight back rather boring on an airliner.
Yeah, yeah. It gets your attention to make an Atlantic crossing in a light airplane.
Then you are designated as an FAA flight
Pilot
examiner.
Yeah, in 1970, I became an FAA designated pilot examiner. And you say, well, what's that? Well, the FAA fizzed over Gato offices don't have near enough personnel and near as many operations and inspectors as they'd like to have. So they can't even do their flight tests that they require be done. So they say, okay, we'll farm it out to industry. So that's just what they do. They try to find a flight instructor who they know, somebody that's real experienced, somebody they can trust. This is a position of trust, and you do the flight tests on behalf of the FAA. And I did quite a bunch. I did this from 1970 to 1996, 26 years. And at that time, I did a little over 4,000. So that's about one every 3 days.
Quite a bunch, over 4,000 pilot flight checks. And 2 of us are in the room. First one is Grady Birdsong. Can you say a few words about what this is your private check ride, and how did that come about?
No, this wasn't my check ride. The certificate, that's the temporary airman certificate that Mr. Bacon signed off. I was scared spitless of Mr. Bacon when I took my check ride. I was more scared of him than I was taking off. And I made it, and I think I bounced a couple of times, and he said, that's okay, don't worry about it. And anyway, that's my youngest son with me there, and I've got both of his children with me today. So.
Oh, nice.
And he was supposed to be here today, but he didn't respond to my email. Patrick Vigil, and some of these museum guys wonder why Fred shows the museum at car shows. I exhibit at car shows and hand out upcoming speaker events. And this was at Broomfield Days. This fella came up and took one of the schedules. He came back about 10 minutes later and he said, you're doing a talk on Bill Bacon. He said he issued my license in 1974. And so Patrick Vigil today flies Lear jets for an oil and gas company over on the Western Slope. I expect that's what he's doing today. So one other person I met in a car show was maybe some of you were here this spring to hear Dr. Steve Castles talk about MIA recoveries from Tarawa. Met him at a car show, so just this year. And then let's see, there was a third one. Who was that? Fred Martin, 1978. I was scared to death too. He doesn't like me telling this story, but I lost it in a spin. He recovered. I raked my wing on a chain link fence. And Bill goes, satisfactory. He didn't say particularly gifted young aviator. He writes satisfactory. But he did tell me that you had a particularly high failure rate. You failed 20% of your flights. So for Bill, you and I are one of 4,000. For us, you played a major event in our life. Even for a modest little private pilot like me, it allows me to pass flying down to a third generation. From my father in World War II to me to my youngest daughter, seen here nailing her altitude and heading assignment. Here's a picture of me in '96 taking both of my daughters for a ride. And the little girl in the yellow jacket on my knee took her first flying lesson in 2012. So it's a family tradition that I'm grateful to you to have played a major role in. Now another one is Kalpana Chawla. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Her name was Kalpana Chawla, and you can see that this lady is from India, and she is a NASA astronaut. Well, in 1977, she was attending the University of Colorado to get her PhD, and she was also taking flight instruction with her husband was her flight instructor. And so I gave her her FAA private pilot's certificate out at Jeffco Airport. And never heard anything after that about her too much. She graduated, became Dr. Chawla, and then she joined the crew of the Columbia space, and sadly, this entire crew was lost in that re-entry over Texas in 2003. Yeah, so yeah, I knew this lady. Everybody called her KC. She was a nice person. So was her husband.
So in our press release, we called Bill a Colorado Aviator hero, so we're not allowed to use the word hero in describing Bill, but here's a true American hero that was your flight student. I wanted to put this into perspective. That's what 40 flight checks look like. And if you climb into a little airplane and you take that many flights, you qualify for a private pilot's license. That's a fairly decent number of flights, but 4,000 is just a number. So I wanted to put it up graphically. This is what 4,000 pilot flight checks look like. It's almost inconceivable graphically. How many times you climbed into a small aircraft with somebody and took them on a ride, and then there's 20% more that you failed. These are not only private pilots, these are also advanced ratings.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that was for private, commercial, instrument, multi-engine, and airline transport pilot. That 4,000 includes the retest after failure too. They come back and get a retest a time or two.
Now, I wanted to say, my dad was vice president of marketing for Cessna, and he would want to shake your hand. In fact, I'm one of those that believes maybe he's here shaking your hand. He always said that the way to grow the aircraft industry is not to compete against the other manufacturers. The way to grow the industry is to create new pilots and to create upgrade pilots, because new pilots are the ones who buy new airplanes. So you're looking at an enormous impact on not just the pilot community, but the aviation industry at large. There's millions of dollars in aircraft sales represented here because of the pilots that you created. You didn't create them, they had their lessons, but you made sure they could fly. Then, this is kind of neat, you did a instrument currency check flight for the captain of Fifi. And, and it was aboard Fifi, right?
Yeah, I renewed his flight instructor certificate. The gentleman he's talking about, his name is Dick Moorcraft. Dick Moorcraft was a senior captain on a United 747-400. And I knew him from other flight tests, but one day he called me up and said, Bill, I need my flight instructor renewed. And I said, yeah, okay. What airplane we got to use? He says the B-29. I said, well, I said, that's not going to happen, Dick. I said, the FAA won't allow me to test an aircraft that I'm not rated in. And so I said, I'll talk to him about it, but we're going to have to find something else. And I really wanted to do this. I wanted to fly that B-29 so bad. So I went over and talked to Dean Baird at who was the deputy chief at the FAO at Jeffco. And Dean said, well, he said, I know you want to do this B-29 flight. Go ahead and do it, but you're going to have to find another airplane a day or two later, like a Cessna 172, and fly that and show that on the paperwork. Don't put that B-29 on the paperwork any place. It won't go. Yeah. Well, the B-29 was on tour. There were 4 airplanes. They had their B-24, the B-29, Douglas A-26, and a P-51. And we all went on tour. I got 2 hours in the right seat, all signed off and everything. So it was great fun. It was a real adventure.
Now, upstairs in the museum, I think this is upstairs, you have an extensive collection of Armed Forces decorations and awards, and you donated them to the museum.
Yeah, back in the 70s, I went to an air show at Jeffco one time, and Pappy Boyington was there, hawking his books. And he had 2 books he was selling. He had the Baba Black Sheep, wow, and another one called Tanya, which is about the P-40 days in China. Well, I met Pappy Boyington, got his autograph, bought his book, and so then at that time, Medal of Honor, a person could buy or sell Medal of Honor legally. You can own. Now, with the Stolen Valor Act, you can't. But so I got about 5 or 6 Medal of Honor from at gun shows and flea markets and various places, and so then I just started collecting medals from there. So yeah, I donated 2 of these Medals of Honor, and this is all of them, and most of these posters don't have the ribbons. This has all the ribbons where there weren't medals associated with it. But yeah, I spent a lot of money on that thing, and I donated it to the museum.
Yeah, so ask a docent or a volunteer to give you a tour. That hall has Colorado Medal of Honor recipients. Ones with the black stripe or posthumous. So Thank you for your donation. And then you have received the FAA's Master Pilot Award. That's the highest award that the agency awards to pilots.
Yeah, this one I got, it's awarded for flying 50 consecutive years without an accident. Is what it, and so they take the date that you soloed and you go 50 years from that. So I was eligible for it in 2005, but anyway, I got it in 2010, and so there aren't a lot of these around.
Well, but it's FAA's highest
Yeah.
honor. Okay, well, we kind of went through on time. I have two kind of digressions, if you'll allow me, that do tie back around to Bill. I'm going to show you two Aviation Hall of Fame events and to make several points. But one, I'll just spit out my ulterior motive. I believe that Bill is a highly viable candidate for the Colorado Aviation Hall of Fame to possibly be submitted next year. This was 2 weeks ago, the 53rd induction ceremony for the Colorado Aviation Hall of Fame. It's sponsored by the Colorado Aviation Historical Society under the auspices of Wings Over the Rockies, and these inductions are official proclamations by the governor. I was seated there. Now, I was given an award at this ceremony. I got the best, biggest prepared piece of salmon I've ever had on a plate in front of me. It was about that big, almost as thick. Had to take most of it home to the dog Chaco. I was sitting next to Babette Andre, who is a laureate of the Colorado Aviation Hall of Fame. We have Babette with us today, and you're an acting ambassador of the Colorado Aviation Historical Society. And so
I might add, Steve Kelly, who's behind us, was president of the society for how many years, Steve?
Last 5 years.
For 5
Okay.
years. So any questions you have about the Historical Society, or the Hysterical Society, as we call it, Steve could answer the questions on how you get somebody inducted.
Okay, well, it's up to Bill, but I think there's several of us in the room that would want to assist. I want to say that this is an epicenter of annual events for Colorado aviation history, veteran history. I think anybody involved in those areas would want to attend this and represent their organization. Seated right behind me was this gentleman. I don't remember his name. He's an Air Force colonel. He is 100 years old. He was a Tuskegee Airman in World War II.
Colonel Harvey.
Colonel Harvey.
Colonel Harvey.
Okay.
The third.
So quite a prestigious event. It was a real privilege to be there. And one of the inductees this year was Larry Ulrich, to circle back to this point we were making about the find in the ELT. Larry Ulrich is recognized as the force behind emergency locator transmitter legislation. He formulated it. He's also the founder of Combs Gates, I believe. Is that right?
Denver Jet Center.
Denver Jet Center, thank you. Along with his friend, Senator Peter Dominic, they got the ELT legislation passed. Senator Dominic attached it to an OSHA bill. That legislation has saved untold hundreds of lives, not Colorado nationwide, but worldwide. So Senator Dominic again was honored, and his son Alex was there, and you were asked to stand up to be recognized. Some of you were here last year and you saw Alex and I collaborating on a presentation on the Himalayan hump operation. We met by happenstance in a bar and discovered that our dads had been deployed to India at the same time, at the same base, and the two men had flown a check flight together in India. And after the war, both men contracted multiple sclerosis. And we bring that out as a possible viral infection from India. Bear with me on these digressions. So upstairs, I was hoping Flint would be here or other curators in the museum. Upstairs in the back gallery is an exhibit on Senator Dominic, and I would like to call for amending this to include his emergency locator transmitter legislation. I think that's very critically important to the history of Senator Dominic, and he's up there in the museum. Now, one more little story, and if you'll indulge me. I got to talking to Bill this year, and it was amazing enough to find he was my FAA flight inspector, but then it was more amazing to realize he knew my first flight instructor when I was 15 in Wichita. Her name was Reba Uglow, and I wrote in one of my books how she was the best instructor I ever had. Reba cared much more about teaching emergency procedures off airport landings, serious crosswind operations. She cared more about that than she cared for the tires and the paint of the airplane. And when I wrote about her in my book, digressing a little, but that passage was read at my youngest daughter's high school graduation by the principal, who wanted to make the point that women can excel every bit as well in aviation as any man. And she and her husband owned a Cessna. So we got to talking about Reba, and I'll make a point here. In 2012, my father was inducted into the Kansas Governor's Aviation Hall of Fame. It was a 2-year application process, so I know something about the application process, as does Babette. But I looked on their website earlier this year, and I found his name had been taken off the roster. So it was working in the back of my mind, how am I going to introduce myself to the new director of the Kansas Aviation Museum in some kind of diplomatic way that I might convince him to restore my dad to the Hall of Fame. I suspected it had something to do with ancient Kansas corporate aviation scandals my dad had immersed himself in. So as we started talking about Reba, I Googled her. I only found one reference to Reba Uglow. It was a 4-year-old Facebook post that said, "Does anybody know about the flying career of my grandma Reba? She passed away in 2002 when I was a young boy." I thought it was futile to reply to a Facebook post that old, but I did. She was my first instructor, yada, yada. 3 days later, I got an email response. "I'm hungry for information about Grandma Reba. Can you please call me?" The email was signed, Executive Director of the Kansas Aviation Museum. These things don't happen by coincidence when you get involved in this history business. So he and I had 2 long phone calls. I sent him my book. On the second phone call, he put me on hold for 15 minutes, and he came back and said, "Removing your dad was a clerical error. We're going to restore him right away." So that's a result of meeting Bill and having these conversations, and it's why it's such a privilege today to have been involved in this. And I leave you to Mr. Bill Bacon for questions and comments. But thank you, Bill.
Any questions? Any questions? Go ahead, Brady.
Bill, when you were flying over the Atlantic to Europe, to Innsbruck, what was the longest segment in there? Did you carry extra gas?
No, I never delivered an airplane that required, let me see if I'm, yeah. I never that required extra fuel tanks. Always just stock factory fuel tank. Sorry, I'm having trouble breathing, but anyway, just stock fuel tanks. I never was in one that was tanked at all.
Just pre-planned the
Right.
whole thing? Yeah.
Any other questions?
Can I?
Another question?
an announcement. He just left the room. Jim Watson was a Vietnam Huey pilot, and he's giving a presentation Monday evening at 7 at Anthem Branch on helicopter flying in Vietnam. He's got some great stories to tell. Ask him about the time he dropped the general's Airstream trailer in the jungle.
Okay, well, thank you all for coming. And Bill, I don't know if you ever got a challenge coin from the museum. Did you ever get one?
I think I got several.
Oh, okay. I thought maybe, I didn't know if you had or not. We
No.
normally give a challenge coin to those presenters, but a lot of people don't realize also Bill was a past direct here at the museum. So, and he's given several presentations, so thank you for that.
Now I'm just an old guy that can't talk.
Okay. Anyway, with that, we will come to a close here at this presentation, but I'd like to remind the veterans here in the audience, Declan would love to have anybody that would, and stand up, Declan, and show you who we are.